I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, good afternoon, Bowling Green, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you may be. My name is Joe DeMar, and I am your host for a Green Future, a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families, and your coworkers and your pets, and the little deer that like to eat your hosta plants, and the coyotes that like to eat the little deer, and basically everybody and everything, because like it or not, we're all wrapped up together on this one tiny little planet called Earth. And unfortunately, my wonderful co-host Rebecca Wood won't be with us today. She's out with COVID. So if you want to give her a get well wishes, she's available on Facebook. Or you can always send a text or email to our show. Our text number is 419-973-5841. And the email is joe@joedemare, D-E-M-A-R-E, for a Green Future, F-O-R, agreenfuture.org. And so I'm sure she would appreciate any well wishes. And of course, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to chat for the next 10 minutes or so about various issues, things I've observed during the week. Then we have an interview with a woman who's been on the show before. Her name is Leona Morgan, and she's with an organization called Haul No. It's H-A-U-L, No. And that she's fighting the transport of uranium ore through Navajo lands. And then it's going to be our hearing from our wonderful patrons and sponsors, and then environmental news. And hopefully at some point during the show, we'll hear from you at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. I had a very nice call last week, and from a woman named Barbie. And hopefully we could hear from you this week. This would be a good week to call in because, without a co-host, it really, really helps when I get a caller. So, just a couple observations during the week. I had a really nice evening last night. I went out stargazing, and the Wood County Park District, full disclosure, one of our sponsors, had an event. It was event with the Toledo Astronomical Society, and what they did was they had a bunch of people from the Toledo Astronomical Society bring their telescopes out to Beavercreek Park. And Beavercreek, I've never been to that park before. It's a very nice little park, pretty dark skies, not as dark as you can get around here, basically, and all sorts of telescopes. Man, I can't believe how much the telescope technology has changed in the past 10 years or so. There was somebody there who had this little tiny telescope. It was about a 12-inch by 12-inch thing, and the lens was only like a 3-inch lens. but it had so much electronics, the charge coupling, the CCD cells behind that little tiny lens, there's so many millions of them that you could blow up the image electronically, so it looked like you had like a 20-inch telescope. And there were people there with 20-inch telescopes and big and small telescopes of all size. And it was really nice. We watched the moon. We saw a huge fireball. That was a highlight. It just traveled from east to west almost across the whole length of the sky. It just kept going in and out, and it was really bright green. It was cool. And also we heard a lot of bats, or we saw a lot of bats, and we heard a lot of owls. And it was just a really beautiful night to be out looking at the stars. And they're going to have two more of these, one August 14th and one, or excuse me, September 14th, and one in October 12th. So that may be something to check out if you're ever interested in looking up at the sky. And we saw galaxies, we saw globular clusters, took a look at the moon, which is the first quarter waxing moon, really beautiful, and really, it's always so intense when you get a really good view of the moon and you can see all the little details of the craters and stuff. And so that was enjoyable. And, just a reminder of how much we're losing with light pollution, because I was talking with these three women came really young, and they looked like they're in their early 20s. And one of them was talking about how she was driving across Nebraska, and she stopped and pulled off because she could see the Milky Way. And that used to be a normal thing. You used to be able to see the Milky Way pretty much everywhere except in the big cities. But now we've got so much light pollution, they keep putting up so many streetlights, that this was like a once in a lifetime event for this 20-something woman. And it should be something everybody experiences, because there's really nothing that lets you see what your place in the cosmos is more accurately than looking up at the Milky Way, which of course, galactically speaking, is looking down because you're looking sort of upside down towards the center of the galaxy, which is at the center of the gravitation. So it's kind of like looking down towards the center of the Earth is looking up towards the center of the Milky Way. It's kind of looking into the galaxy. So it was just a really cool event, and just a reminder that when you get closer to the natural world, when you get closer to nature, you get more beauty. You get to see cool things. You get to hear owls and see bats and see fireflies and fireballs. It was just great. So, but contrast that with yesterday morning. I spent most of the day yesterday out in my yard, which I have to admit I've been neglecting most of the summer, because regular listeners to the show know that I was off in India and off wilderness camping for an entire month. And what happened in my yard during that month is that the trees of heaven basically took over. This has been an incredible year for the tree of heaven plant, which it's an invasive species. It's one of the first and most aggressive invasive species we've got in North America. This is a tree that is native to China and Taiwan, but in 1784, the Philadelphia Bartram Botanical Garden brought the very first tree of heaven to the United States, and the Latin name is Ailanthus altissima, but the common name is, besides tree of heaven, is stinking sumac. Because if you've ever had to fight tree of heaven in your yard, you know that's like the defining characteristic, is these things stink. That they look kind of similar to both sumac, staghorn sumac, and black walnut when they're young, but as soon as you like brush a leaf or start trying to pull it up, you get that tree of heaven smell. You're you know what you're pulling up. And for a long time, for like 200 years, this was touted as this wonderful ornamental tree in the US because it grows super fast. It provides shade. Like in 2 years, it's big enough to start providing shade. And, you know, when you look at it, it just looks like another tree. But, and in fact, there was a book, a famous book, one of the first sort of pro-nature novels. It was called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And that tree in that book, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, was a tree of heaven plant, because one thing about tree of heaven is that it can tolerate tremendous levels of salt and pollution, you know, levels that kill pretty much every other tree. So in the heart of New York City at that time, tree of heaven was pretty much the only thing that could grow. But what has been happening, and in fact, turns out that it is the most rapidly growing tree in North America. So once it gets started, it will take over. And it is what's called an allelopath, and meaning it releases an allelopathic chemical called ailanthone, ailanthone, ailanthone. And what ailanthone does is it kills all the surrounding plants. So that's what allelopaths do, is they release toxic chemicals that kill other plants. And interestingly, they release more when they're younger. And so they're very sneaky. I had in my yard 2 great big mulberry trees that, yes, I know that most of the mulberry trees you find are actually also invasive species, but I was letting them grow because I love mulberries. And I realized that what happened is these trees of heaven started getting started in the little strip where the mulberry tree was, and now the mulberries are dead. They killed the mulberry trees because this is what they do. They release these toxic chemicals, and they grow both by seed and by extending roots. And one of the things that happened yesterday, I was pulling them up in my yard. I literally pulled up about 100 of various sizes, from tiny little ones to, you know, great big ones. And I pulled one up that the sapling was about 4 foot tall, but this horizontal root that went down like 2 inches and then straight across my yard, that was like 8 feet. So the root was twice as big as the actual tree. And that's the key to how they take over areas. They really, literally can crowd out every other plant. And another interesting thing about tree of heaven, we've talked before about the spotted lanternfly, which is the latest insect invasive that's coming in, that pretty much eat everything. But they are specifically evolved to eat tree of heaven. In fact, they use tree of heaven to reproduce. That's where they lay their eggs, in tree of heaven trees. And they kill individual trees sometimes, but they're not actually aggressive enough to be a control of tree of heaven populations. They're kind of like along for the ride with tree of heaven. And in fact, a woman just developed a spotted lanternfly trap that attracts the lanternflies into this trap by releasing tree of heaven odors, by taking the chemical that makes tree of heaven smelly and using that to attract the lanternflies. And it's a very effective trap, but I was battling them yesterday, you know, all day, and it was quite the struggle. And unfortunately, what the internet says is that doing it the way I was doing it, which is pulling them up, is actually not only not effective in the long run, but it actually creates more of them, because if you leave even a little tiny bit of the root, more tree of heavens will sprout up, and so you end up with more. I'm going to test that, because I was also told the same thing about honeysuckle, the invasive honeysuckle, but I basically fought that back in my yard by keeping it clipped whenever I found it, and it pretty much took care of it. I didn't have to resort to herbicides. The internet is telling me that the only way to actually fight it is to use herbicides like glyphosate, and I'm going to resist that as long as I can. And I'm also going to try, before I fall back on herbicides, I'm going to try, there's some other herbicidal things you could do that are much more natural. Like there's recipes on the internet where you mix vinegar, dishwashing soap, and salt, and you use that as an herbicide, and it's supposed to be much safer for the environment, depending on what kind of dishwashing liquid you use. So, being like an ecologist, that's my first line of attack. I really, I haven't used herbicides even once in my 12 years of living in this place. So I don't really want to start now, because I'm to the point where the birds and the other animals really love my yard. They prefer my yard to my neighbors, because none of the seeds or none of the bugs in my yard have that chemically taste that you get in places that use herbicides and pesticides. But we'll have to see how this battle against Tree of Heaven goes in my yard. So just a reminder, don't be planting these things. They still, literally, you can still buy Tree of Heaven to use in your yard for landscaping, just like you can still buy purple loosestrife and a whole host of other really nasty invasives, which frankly should be illegal. We really should have regulations against this stuff, but we don't, because people who make money selling them to you don't want to be limited by pesky things like reality or ecological principles. So that's my rant for the morning. And so I guess my question for the day, if anybody out there is also fighting Tree of Heaven in their yard, and if you've had any success, what did you use? Did you fall back to herbicides? Did you manage to do it without herbicides? Let me know, 877-909-1007, and we'll put you right on the air. So now, speaking of regulations and doing things ecologically, my interview this morning is with a wonderful woman named Leona Morgan, and Leona is trying to prevent a repeat of an ecological disaster out in the West. And that ecological disaster was the mining, milling, and transport of uranium, because back all the way from the 1950s through up to the 1990s, the West was pockmarked with uranium mines. Uranium ore was being trucked all over the place. There was milling, there was refining going on, and the result has been massive contamination with radioactive isotopes all over the West. And the Navajo people, the Dene people in particular, lost an entire generation of young men in the uranium mines. Basically, they mined without proper protection, and the rates of cancer and reproductive failure were just off the charts. They literally lost a whole generation, and you'll hear a little bit about that in the interview. But what's happening now is that the Biden administration has opened up another new uranium mine right next to the Grand Canyon, called the Pinyon Plain Mine. It opened it back in January, but they're just now starting to actually ship the uranium ore to the uranium mill sites. And in doing that, they've violated Navajo Nation sovereignty. And so let's go to that interview and hear a little bit about what's happening out west. Welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and your organization?
Sure. My name is Leona Morgan. I am a co-founder of Hall No. I also worked with a lot of other organizations over the years. But yeah, I'm here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, working on an issue right now that's located near the Grand Canyon. So thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And so what is the purpose of Hall No?
Hall No started in 2016 to work on one mine, the Canyon Mine, owned by Energy Fuels, today known as the Pinyon Plain Uranium Mine. Energy Fuels also owns the only licensed uranium mill in the country. So currently there's only one place to process uranium ore, and that's in southeast Utah. This is a facility on the Ute Mountain Ute homelands, and the Pinyon Plain is on the Havasupai homelands. Hall No, we're Diné. Our group is, we were Diné founded, and a lot of our work is based in our Diné ways. So what we did was to educate our people along the Hall route. Back in 2016, we were primarily concerned that people were not aware that Obama had created this 20-year mineral withdrawal. So the 20-year mineral withdrawal prevented new uranium mining around the Grand Canyon in an area, two areas that were almost 1 million acres. So the idea was Obama protected 1 million acres from new mining, but we were out there educating people that these were mining claims. They were simply plots of land, but the actual mines, the actual uranium mines that were already built, those were largely grandfathered in. So most of the mines that were built were already done mining or mined out. And Pinyon Plain had not started mining, but was in this loophole. So last year, when Biden made the 20-year withdrawal permanent in what was known as the National Monument, that was actually signed on August 8th. So the anniversary of the monument is coming up. People today still don't understand that this monument, yes, it protects almost 1 million acres from new mining. That means these are pieces of land that probably would never be developed anyway. All of that is never going to happen. They will never be developed. But the mines that were already there were all grandfathered in. So the Pinyon Plain mine started on January 8th this year. It was licensed in 1986, but it took a long time. This is very normal for uranium companies, and it just shows how slow the nuclear industry is. So I'm seeing Pinyon Plain as, as a co-founder of Hall No, our primary purpose was to stop the transport. So to stop the transport through Navajo Nation, we have to stop the mine. And what I'm seeing, knowing that the United States has stopped buying uranium from Russia, Biden signed the Nuclear Fuel Security Act went through Congress in December. And then in November last year, Biden promised the world, he committed, and got 21 other countries along with the United States to triple nuclear energy development by 2050. So if we're not buying uranium from Russia and they're gearing up to develop new nuclear energy, which is not really going to happen in the time frame according to the process of licensing new, power plants. Look at Vogtle, and SMNRs aren't even online. So basically, we're looking at a lot of propaganda, a lot of hype to put funding into new nuclear energy. But at the same time, there's trillions going into nuclear weapons. So I've been very aware of the buildup to push for new uranium. And so I am, as a co-founder of this group, we want to stop the mine. Of course, the idea of stopping the transport is just a symptom of the mine, problem of the mine. But the mine is a symptom of a larger problem of nuclear proliferation. So I'm really concerned, especially someone coming from a place that was mined, went through a uranium boom in the 1950s to the 1970s. All the places that were mined already, like the Black Hills, South Texas, pretty much the Intermountain West, all of those places have already been explored for uranium and different minerals. So I'm concerned all of us in the Intermountain West are going to be targeted for new mining. And Energy Fuels is just the first company to start at the Grand Canyon and in Utah. So Energy Fuels has been mining. They started transport through the Navajo Nation last week. We had been communicating with the Navajo Nation for years. This current administration is a little bit different. So as Hall No, we go to the community. We try our best to support the local community. And so earlier this year, when we found out the mining started on January 8th, and is immediately we went to the communities. That was Tuesday or Monday, and then we were in the community that Saturday, January 13th, and we announced to several community leaders at a regional meeting called the Western Navajo Agency Council meeting. So at this meeting, we announced to community leaders what was going on. Those community leaders began to work fast to pass resolutions urging the Navajo Nation to do something. So all of the communities along the haul route, they were the ones that pushed the Navajo Nation to not only stop the transport, but to put better protections in place. So since then, the Navajo Nation has been more proactive. Last week, we saw the Navajo Nation send out some police to stop the transport. They didn't catch the truck. I believe, I'm still not 100% sure. I understand one truck made it through to the mill, but there has been no other transport because it's been temporarily paused. So the Navajo Nation got the governor of Arizona to temporarily pause the transport. In the meantime, Hall No has never received a response from the president of the Navajo Nation. I've been in contact with some Navajo Nation leaders and elected officials, such as the Speaker of the Council and other chapter officials. Because what we saw on Friday was the Navajo Nation president invited NGO, it's an indigenous NGO called Indian Collective. So Indian Collective and others went to help the Navajo Nation president and the First Lady do this action on the Navajo Nation at Cameron. So this was largely a show of Navajo Nation sovereignty, and the Navajo Nation government, should do more things to enforce its sovereignty. But it was definitely a Navajo Nation show to stop the transport, which it did, temporarily, until we, we'll know what that means in the coming weeks. But I'm curious if that temporary pause is just until November, being an election year, we don't know. So right now there's a temporary pause that the Navajo Nation government helped to get through the governor because of the Navajo Nation law that says there's no transport through our nation. The mine, we have a law that says no mining, but the mine is very far away from Navajo Nation. It's not on Navajo Nation jurisdiction. So the Navajo Nation is not, probably has no jurisdiction. Of course, they can't do anything legally to stop the mining, which is off the nation. So in that sense, the Navajo Nation's jurisdiction is primarily on the transport. And so what they're doing is to uphold that law, which is to stop the transport. The bigger goal is to stop the mine. So Havasupai, the Sierra Club, and all these other groups that had been working on this issue since the 80s, going through court cases and all of the research and all of the work that's been done over the years. I mean, they've been fighting it for decades. And our groups, we sent to the governor of Arizona, Hall No was included with this work, to send over 17,000 petitions to the governor of Arizona demanding the same thing. And we've been requesting a meeting with the governor of Arizona since January, since the whole thing started. And since the transport started, we're still calling on the governor to shut down the mine. So all of the entities that have been working to shut down the mine, we have not received any communication from the governor, because when the national monument was signed, a lot of people thought the fight was won. And when the mine started, people were confused. They didn't know that the national monument didn't stop the mine. So Hall No has been trying to educate on these things for years. We've never been in that position to say this is, trying to, take ownership 100%. we have ownership of this fight as Diné people. All Diné people have a stake in this fight, but Hall No is not. We're not the leaders of this thing. You know, it's
Gotcha.
not even an incorporated group. It's more of a campaign. I think it's more of a movement, so people
Mhm.
can connect Hall No to their local fights. We are doing rallies, protests. Right now, Hall No is supporting other rallies. This weekend, there was 5 separate rallies. The Navajo Nation rally was Friday morning. There was 2 community rallies in Cameron, 1 community rally in Flagstaff that just spontaneously came together. It was beautiful. And then Sunday was the Sierra Club rally. So a bunch of us gathered close to the mine site. But Hall No is it's something, you know, it's an idea, it's a movement, it's a goal. Of course we want to stop the mine. I'm so happy we stopped Holtec in New Mexico. We stopped those canisters and casks and whatever they were trying to haul on the railroad. When we were fighting the Holtec fight, I was fighting the Hall No fight at the same time, and you know, I saw the connection there, and that's one of the things I was communicating to my tribe. You know, since Hall No started, I was talking about the transport that the Navajo Nation itself, it makes laws and it is trying to enforce its laws and its transportation regulations. And this is, I think, you know, it's pretty historical that this government is standing up to the state of Arizona, Utah, and then the United States to say, hey, we have this law in place and you need to respect our law. With interstate commerce and everything the feds put against us, you know, this is to me a very good show of the Navajo Nation doing its job. And so Hall No, we asked, you know, we've been talking about these things for years. And so I'm glad the Navajo Nation is stepping in, but we are still holding them accountable to what the Navajo Nation is doing or not doing. And those are internal issues as Diné people. And
Mhm.
so the idea to transition, this move to push for nuclear by the United States, it's not a plan. It's propaganda, you know, it's pipe dreams, it's the pie in
Right.
the sky that's never gonna happen, you know, like
Sure.
fusion.
I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned how the idea of tripling nuclear power by 2050 is kind of an imaginary sort of pipe dream. But the damage done to the Dene people and the indigenous people all over the West by the uranium mining that's already happened, that's very real, isn't it? What kind of damage has already been done that we're looking at a replay of this time?
So our people are living daily with our relatives dying, and we have relatives who are sick and we hear them coughing, we see them in the hospital, they have to go for kidney dialysis and other places. There's no cancer treatment centers on the res. All of these health problems that our elders are going through, we see it, we're living with it, we're losing our family. At the same time, there's no real studies on the health impacts. The UNM and the Southwest Research and Information Center did a study called the Navajo Birth Cohort Study, which shows there are high levels of uranium coming out of the urine of newborn babies. So this is something that's in our bodies, it's in our blood, it's in our DNA, and it's killing us. We don't know all the impacts. Personally, I don't live near a uranium mine, but there's on the res, there's 500, they say 523 um, sites, but some people say, well, if you count all the exploratory drill holes that were never capped, if you count everything, you know, it's more like 2,000. Stanford put out a map, interactive map that shows 23,000 abandoned mines across the country. all of these mines, we say they're abandoned because these were mines when the United States did not have laws in place to enforce cleanup. So 23 abandoned mines all over the country with no funding to clean them up. So they're blowing around radioactive dust, water. So it's not just Navajo, but Navajo Nation is getting a lot of attention, and we were largely mistreated. Our elders, again, were not educated. A lot of them were not educated on the harms. Today, I think I'm hearing stories that some people knew there were harms, just like with the oil and gas developments, with coal mining. Some people say they were well aware. When there's no other place to get a job, they're kind of forced to do these dirty jobs to feed their families. I was just talking to someone who worked at a uranium mine yesterday, and he said he had a carpool and he's from a different nation. And he said they would all go to work together, and that group of people worked at the mine for a long time. He said, I only worked for 2 years. He said, everyone else that was in that carpool are gone. They all died. So there's so many stories about accidents, environmental contamination that was never reported, never cleaned up. That's one thing. But the impacts to our people, not just from the health and the death, but the treatment through the system, like you know, the disparity in the distribution of funds under the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. So we talk about RECA, but a lot of people said it was very racist that Navajos didn't receive the same amount of compensation as, let's say, white uranium workers. So all of the disparities that exist today in our healthcare systems, our cleanup. So those are things that are happening today. People think colonization was the old West and, cowboys and Indians or whatever. Colonization is today. Colonization is the United States continuing to help industry, to help uranium companies, and to continue funding genocide through allowing new uranium mining. So we have had substandard, horrible processes for cleanup, lack of information. I mean, when you look at other communities that were hurt, let's say, other projects that were cleaned up, and you compare them to anything on Navajo, it's egregious the way our people have been treated, not only when we helped the United States win World War II with our language and providing all this uranium, but to see the treatment today and how it continues. The Pueblo folks, our relatives, they're dealing with more plutonium pits, tritium releases, and so many things happening in New Mexico at the hands of the United States government. So all of this, it's not past history. We're dealing with breathing in contamination from abandoned uranium mines, unknown hazards from the Nevada tests, because we're all downwind from those Nevada tests. And so we don't have health studies. And this is not just Navajo. There's people in Utah, there's people everywhere that have increased rates of cancers, and they don't know where they're from. So they're guessing the Nevada tests.
So if people want to follow your organization, how would they do that?
The hashtag Hall No is being used a lot. So if you just Google hashtag Hall No, things should come up. You can like us, you can follow us on social media. Other folks are putting out a lot of good media. There's a group called Tuot Njuna Ane. They're putting out a lot of information. They're a Diné group. Follow Tuot Njuna Ane. You can also follow the Sierra Club. They started Protect Grand Canyon. So they have a lot of reels and information on Instagram. You can go to our website for the background, and then hopefully we'll have some updates soon. I would encourage folks to also help us out by writing op-eds, connect to your local nuclear issue. If folks want to support us, people can do solidarity rallies. You can do a Hall No rally in Ohio about Piketon, or whatever issue over there. I think it would be cool to see folks support all over the country. We're asking folks to write letters to the governor of Arizona, President Biden. We want to shut down the mine. And of course, there is the uranium mill.
Okay, so that was our interview with Leona Morgan of Hall No. We wish them luck over there in stopping the transport of the uranium ore, which of course leads to enriched uranium fuel, which of course leads to nuclear waste, which affects all of us. Now it's time to hear from our advertisers and patrons.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
And just a little supplement to the regular Wood County Park District ad. Right now they're looking to hire a community and communications specialist. So if you're somebody who's looking for a job, and this is a job for people who would make community communications and create advertising and basically sort of oversee the public face of the Wood County Park District. So just something to keep in mind if you're somebody looking for a job. For Green Future is also brought to you by our patrons. And our patrons are incredible people to whom we are eternally grateful. They're people who've gone to patreon.com, that's Patreon, and there they searched for Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They looked at the different membership levels that we offer, and they chose one that matched their budget. And so every month a little bit comes out of their accounts and comes over to us, and that's how we could afford to keep this show on the air for the 5.5 years that we've been airing this incredible program for A Green Future. So thank you very much to our patrons. And now on to environmental news, and we've got a lot of news to get through, and actually not too much time. Leona's interview was a little longer than usual. First story, over to Los Angeles. And so, as everybody I'm sure knows, the 2024 Olympics are happening in Paris right now. But the next Summer Olympics are going to be in Los Angeles in 2028. And there's a story in the LA Times, August 10th, and the title is LA Mayor Karen Bass outlines vision for, quote, parentheses almost, on parentheses, quote, car-free, unquote, Olympics. Basically, the mayor is saying that she wants there to be no or almost no car traffic in Los Angeles during the Olympics in 2028. And the estimates are that 15 million extra people will descend on Los Angeles. And the last time LA hosted the Olympics, they had a lot of success keeping the cars off the road. They had businesses stagger their work hours so that people went to work, third shift instead of first shift. And people in Los Angeles were kind of amazed that there wasn't a big traffic snarl. This time around, the mayor's asking people to do that. She's also asking companies to have everybody work from home the way they did in COVID. And LA is leasing 3,000 buses, and they're from other municipalities, and they've got $200 million in federal funds to do that. And that's a little disappointing because it would kind of be better if they spent $200 million buying a whole bunch of new electric buses and improving, ramping up their public transport to the point where they're not just borrowing buses from other places. But it's still a worthy goal to try to have a car-free Olympics, and let's hope they do that and sort of demonstrate to the world that it's possible. We know it's possible because it's happening in a lot of other places, but it would be really nice to see that in a big American city. Okay, next story. And this is from Anthropocene magazine, or it's anthropocenemag.org, story August 2nd, 2024. And the title is Artificial Sweeteners Don't Degrade in the Human Body, ... or in nature. And it turns out that sucralose is an artificial sweetener, and the reason people love it is that it passes right through your body. You don't digest it at all. But that means it goes right out the other end and into the environment. And apparently, sewage treatment plants don't handle sucralose particularly well, and so it's getting out into our waterways. In fact, scientists use it to sort of look for human signature in terms of degrading waterways. That they like go out, and if they test for sucralose and they find it, they're like, oh yeah, sewage, something is getting into the water here from humans. There was a study done, and this study found that putting sucralose in with the microorganisms that live in the water around Florida has some very interesting effects. Cyanobacteria, they're the bacteria that cause the blue-green algae blooms. They're not algae at all. Basically, cyanobacteria love sucralose. They eat it up. And so having sucralose in the water actually contributes to blue-green algae blooms. The effect on diatoms, and diatoms are little creatures that also photosynthesize. They are algae. Interestingly, freshwater diatoms, when you put sucralose in the water, first they bloom. They have this big growth surge, and then they crash. Actually, they go down to like half the pre-sucralose population. So, in other words, sucralose causes a sugar crash in those algae, and so it really knocks them out. Interestingly, the cyanobacteria in salt water, brackish water, you add sucralose and it just kills them, basically. So something in the chemistry of fresh water versus salt water affects how the cyanobacteria react to sucralose, but it's also telling that the scientists don't even know what's going on. That all they do know now is they've tested it, and adding sucralose to the environment is not good. It encourages cyanobacteria blooms, and it eliminates the diatoms, which are kind of the base of freshwater ecosystems, of the diatoms. So if you're somebody who uses sucralose, maybe think. Next, off to Washington State and some good news. This was from earthjustice.org's website. Washington State government has passed a law that mandates electric buses for school districts. So if school districts have to buy a new bus, they have to buy an electric bus if it turns out the operating costs are the same or less than diesel. So it's not perfect. It's not a law that says, school districts have to buy electric now. But if they're equivalent, if the diesel and the electric are roughly the same in terms of costs, then they have to choose electric. And it's a good law because diesel sucks. Diesel exhaust causes cancer and asthma. It's been proven. The air quality inside a diesel bus is 12 times worse than the air quality outside. So, and it brought to mind an experience I had back when I was going to the SUNY at Buffalo, State University of New York at Buffalo. They had two main campuses, one in Amherst, one in downtown Buffalo, and they had buses constantly running between them. And I was riding one of those buses once, and I realized I was feeling like really groggy and sleepy. And I was sitting in the back seat, the farthest back where the engine was. I ran my fingers under the edge of the seat, and they came up covered in soot. So what was happening was diesel exhaust was going directly into the buses. And actually it got to the point where some of the bus drivers were so knocked out that they started crashing into stuff. I wrote a big letter in the student paper, and it was one of my first sort of successes as an environmental activist. And after that, the school went back and they basically fixed all the buses. They plugged all that connection between that back seat where the exhaust was getting in. So I felt really good about that. But yeah, diesel sucks. And if you're somebody who's in a school district making this decision, follow state of Washington's example and go to electric buses. There's tons of federal money to do this. So, okay, next story. Off to Pike County, which is, basically the Portsmouth gaseous diffusion plant. We've talked about that quite a bit on this show. The one that Vina Coley is trying to stop. We have reported before that the school in Piketon got closed, the Zons Corner Middle School, because it's contaminated with radioactive stuff from the Piketon uranium processing plant. It's contaminated with neptunium, americium, technetium, uranium, plutonium. It's just like a cocktail of radioactive, deadly stuff. And it turns out the school district has decided to just auction it off to the highest bidder. And the auction ad doesn't mention the fact that it's contaminated with radiation. And it's looking like the most likely buyer for it is the Pike Christian Academy. And so that wants to, according to inside sources, this is a story in the Scioto Valley Guardian on July 19th. According to that story, the Pike Christian Academy wants to just reopen it as a school without doing anything about it, which is insane. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or an atheist or a Muslim. Radiation is going to affect you the same way. It's going to be just as deadly, no matter who you pray to or how you pray. The world doesn't work like that. So just being Christian is no guard against getting cancer from radiation. And let's hope this doesn't go through. There are people up in arms about it. The contamination down there is so bad that the Pike County Health District has said that within a 6-mile radius of the Portsmouth gaseous diffusion plant, people are forbidden from eating their garden produce because there's so much of this contamination that's migrated so far off the structure. And it just points out again how crazy it is that they've reopened it and that they're starting to enrich uranium there again. So just another terrible thing. I actually saw this happen with a Love Canal in Buffalo. They just reopened it and people got cancer again. They just did the same mistake. And, politicians love to do this. Okay, we got to move along. Next story, Scientific American, June 25th, quote, mangrove trees on the move, taking the tropics with them, unquote. Turns out mangroves all over the world are moving up into what was areas that used to be too cold for them. They can't take freezes, and so they've always been a tropical and a subtropical plant. But now they're moving north up from Florida. They're already in Georgia, and it's an interesting thing. They're also moving south down in South Africa, moving closer to the South Pole. And even as 50%, the world has lost 35% of its mangrove forests because of development. But even as that's happened, the mangroves have been moving north. And so it's very interesting. It's just yet another sign global warming is real. You don't know if this is going to be a net positive or negative in terms of ecology, because they'd also threaten wetlands, but it's happening and there's nothing we could do about it. All right, last story, and let's see how much time we got here. Not much time. Nature Communications, August 1st, 2024, quote, achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions critical to limit climate tipping risks. And basically what they've done here is what I've been, begging scientists to do for decades. They are connecting the different positive feedback loops. Okay, so they've connected the Atlantic Meridional Current collapsing, the Amazon rainforest switching from rainforest to savanna, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, and the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet. And so they're running climate simulations that finally look at more than one system at a time. And they've discovered, which, something we've been saying forever, that all these effects positively feed back into each other. So the melting of the ice sheets is speeding the creation of the destruction of the rainforest, which is speeding the collapse of the Atlantic current. And they're saying that we're reaching the tipping point much faster than people realized before. And the problem is, and so what will happen once we pass these tipping points is the tropics will get too dry to support forests. The north, like in Europe and much of the North America, will get too cold to support agriculture. The Middle East will become too hot for life. It'll literally become too hot to live in. And the basically, once it happens, once we reach that tipping point, it may not be possible to go back, because these changes can become permanent in human terms. And so it's a very sobering study, but I'm glad they finally did it. And it's just something that we've been saying I've been saying it for decades. I used to have a show in Buffalo called Green Radio back in the second Bush administration. And I was saying this as loud and just to many as people as I could back then. And it's just nice that finally actual climate scientists are putting these twos and twos together and coming up with positive feedback loops. All right, that's it for our show. I hear the music playing. Thank you so much for listening. And Rebecca fans, don't worry, I'm sure she'll be back next week, even though they didn't give her antivirals for her COVID, even though she asks. But I'm confident she'll get over it. But thanks again for listening. This is Joe DeMar, and I am signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!